Robin, welcome. Are you ready to take it away?
We are ready. Thank you very much. I just want to share the screen for a minute. Without my daughter India's help and assistance, this would not have happened. The whole series would not have happened. So luckily I have a tech-savvy daughter, many talents, and she's going to help us start right now. All right. Thank you very much, Indy. Good evening, everyone. It's delightful to have you with me, even though I can't see you. I really miss having a live audience. I really miss your comments and questions and answers. Indy's going to be here answering your questions in the chat room, so don't hesitate to just ask her a question or tell her if you can't hear me or if the screen's not clear. Like Adam said, we are going to have a question and answer session afterwards, so please hit me with some questions. Anyway, we're going to start here at the Art Institute of Chicago. It's often voted the best art museum in the world. In 2014, anyway, there was this huge survey taken and it was voted the best. Now, I know why it's voted the best, but it's amazing when our European friends come over and we take them to the Art Institute. Around every corner they go, oh my God, you have that one? You have that one? You know, they're just amazed that a city like Chicago would have all these fine works of art, internationally known works of art. So like Adam said, we're going to visit the Art Institute of Chicago first. Then we're going to travel down to the Nelson Atkins in Kansas City. And there's the Nelson Atkins. As you can see, that's very neoclassical. And then at the bottom here, we're going to go to Bentonville, Arkansas, to Crystal Bridges, a relatively new museum, mostly American art, started and funded by Alice Walton. So we've got a lot of moving around to do tonight. So let's start. My daughter thought you might need a quick geography lesson, especially if you grew up in California. So there's Illinois, Missouri, and Arkansas, which we are going to hit tonight. So we're going to start at the Peninsula Hotel. You know, we're going to just take a little Southwest nonstop flight from San Diego, and we're going to land at Midway. It's a very easy trip, just 12 miles away from Midway Airport to downtown Chicago. It's very convenient to get there, and why not spend the night in the Peninsula Hotel? It's always ranked very highly, and they have a wonderful spa. They have a wonderful restaurant. We're just going to luxuriate before we stroll down Michigan Avenue and cross the famous Chicago River. So there we go. It's a beautiful city. If you ever make it there, I hope that you would go on the Architectural River Tour, which shows you all these monumental buildings. Remember, skyscrapers were invented in Chicago, Illinois. And the reason is because they had to go up. They had the lake here, the river here. They had a very small area of land, so they couldn't spread out. They had to go up. And so Frank Lloyd Wright and others designed the first skyscrapers in the United States. Just recently, we have put together Millennium Park. I guess it's been about 20 years now, but it seems like yesterday. We have world-renowned sculptors and artists that helped us put together Millennium Park. Of course, we have Cloud Gate by Anish Kapoor, a very famous London-based artist. Anish called it Cloud Gate, but it's actually, people call it the Bean. On the other side, on the right-hand side, we have an artist who did these huge videos of real close-ups of faces. He went out and photographed 5,000 Chicago residences, puts their faces on these monumental fountains, actually, because out of their mouths spew clean water. And as you can see in the summer, hot summertime, everyone's enjoying splashing around in front of these gigantic, happy Chicago faces. Right across the street from the Art Institute of Chicago is Frank Gehry's famous band shell. And you can see that it kind of looks like a ripped open tin can, and you can see the faces there just to the left. So now I've kind of put you in context, and across the street, as you can see, is the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, originally it started in 1866 as an art and design club. There were a lot of East Coast people who had moved to Chicago for various financial reasons. It was the land of opportunity. The stockyards were there. They supplied cattle from the West to go to the East Coast. And they made a lot of money. Well, they invested that money in their hometown. So the art club started in 1866, and then when the Columbian exhibition was being put together, they insisted on putting together this bastion of fabulous art, and that's how the Art Institute started. So it's the oldest, actually the oldest and second largest art museum in the United States. They have over 300,000 artworks. They have over 2 million visitors a year. They always have a blockbuster exhibition that it gets so crazy and crowded you can barely elbow your way through. But I've seen Monet exhibition there twice. Once I brought my high school students there, and another time, decades later, I brought my university students to see a second Monet exhibition. They had the Gauguin Van Gogh exhibition. They've done Picasso a couple of times, Seurat, Munch, Magritte's exhibition. We saw the Liechtenstein blockbuster, the Impressionist fashions as well. You see, Chicago's always been in competition with New York City. They're always kind of vying for first place in lots of things. But we'll see who's the winner. So here we have, the Art Institute was founded in 1879. It was located in Grant Park, which is where Millennium Park is now. And it has 11 specific departments. And they include such fine works of art, of course, as Georges Seurat's Sunday Afternoon in the Park, Picasso, The Old Guitarist, Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, Grant Wood's American Gothic. And as I mentioned before, the permanent collection has over 300,000 works of art. All right, so I'll talk more about the donors and the famous people who study there in just a minute. But here you can see it's a Beaux-Arts. It's been added on to at least 9 times, and it's had many different architectural firms. The latest expansion, of course, is the contemporary wing, which was done by Renzo Piano. You've heard his name a lot because he has designed lots of contemporary art museums throughout his lifetime. But since the year 2000, there's been over 300 new art museums built in the United States. So what is the draw? So here we have some old pictures when Grant Park was kind of out in the middle of the nowhere. It's very close to the lake, of course. And in 1894, these 2 lions, these 2 large bronze lions, you can barely see them against the old black and white photographs and see the old cars, the old jalopies there. They were built by Edward Kemmy and his wife, Laura. She was a very famous sculptress as well, and she helped her husband. He was the top animal sculptor in the United States. So they commissioned Edward to do these 2 prominent lions, and they live there today. Here's an old, very old photograph of them and the facade of the Art Institute, which hasn't changed that much. It's just been added to a lot. And here they are today with the skyscrapers in the background. The Prudential building that you see there on the left, that used to be the tallest building in Chicago when I was just a kid. So when we'd go to the Art Institute and then we'd end up having dinner at the top of the rock on top of the Prudential building, they had a restaurant. It's called Top of the Rock. I think the food was pretty bad. I don't know. I don't remember. But here we are at the facade. And the lions play a prominent part in Chicago culture. They're always being decorated. And so when the Bears football team went to the Super Bowl, they fashioned these very large helmets to put on top of their heads. And so you have these very dignified lions, but they put a football hat on them, or helmet. And now, with the horrible pandemic going on, they've put some PPE masks on them as well, kind of to remind everybody to stay safe. And here's the Renzo Piano Contemporary Wing that was just completed in 2009. Back to the neoclassical entrance, you can see that they have a multitude of incredible, spectacular staircases. You think you're in, the palace. You think you're in a palace. It's amazing what they do to you. You know that you're in a place of importance. Art has always meant power. It's meant wealth. It's meant money. And the fathers of the Art Institute and mothers wanted to make sure you knew that you were in a very, very important place. They're also very interested in preserving the architecture of Chicago for many reasons. And here we have the Board of Trade room, which they dismantled, the original Board of Trade, and put into a room at the Art Institute of Chicago. I spent many long but wonderful hours in the Board of Trade room because every fall we would have a portfolio days where hopeful high school students who wanted to come in and have different institutions, there were 55 art schools there. And I would represent the University of Illinois and talk to them about their art and what they should do to beef up their portfolio, what their ACT scores should be. It was just nonstop fun for like 4 hours. It was great. Really enjoyed it. So I'm quite familiar with that room. It's a Louis B. Sullivan room. And so there you can see the details. Remember, Louis Sullivan was a mentor and the first employer of Frank Lloyd Wright. So you're going to see some influences back and forth for both of them. And there's portfolio days on the right, where students would lay out their artwork and we'd talk to them about it. Just wonderful. Talent is so universal and monumental. But back to the collection. So, you know, walking into an art museum, you think, oh, did the city build this building? Did the city buy these artworks? No, not at all. These artworks were gifts of very famous, wealthy people wanting to promote elevate the status of their cities. And here, we wouldn't have El Greco's Assumption of the Virgin, done in 1577 for a church in Toledo, except for Mary Cassatt. So Mary, as you know, traveled Europe greatly. She studied at she wanted to study at the École des Beaux-Arts and hired Degas to give her art lessons instead and became a very famous French Impressionist as well. But actually, she's an American. And so she's very interested in providing the American art collectors with what they should buy from Europe. Well, at the turn of the century like that, you know, there was a depression in Europe. And so the art market was just flooded with artwork, and Toledo wanted to sell this painting. It's got a wonderful historical background in that El Greco didn't know what to do for such a big piece. Look at that big piece. So what he did is he took tablecloth linen and pieced those together to paint this incredible painting. And it hangs in the Art Institute today. And it's at the top of one of those stairways. It's just so impressive to walk in there, and it's in its own space. But thanks to Mary for getting us over here, because many museums were vying for it, but Chicago finally got it. Just like Chicago really got the World's Fair, the Columbian Exhibition in 1893. They beat out New York and many other cities. Chicago is tenacious. And here's what the stairway used to look like, with different tapestries, photographs, very dramatic. And here's another view of it. If you go through the door on the left, you will go to the Impressionist wing. If you go to the door on the right, you'll go and see that El Greco. And you can see straight ahead, there's lots of architectural details that they've brought in from the city. They don't demolish their buildings, but they take apart the most interesting parts of them and put them in art museums. Very smart. They have more El Grecos, of course. El Greco was hired by the Catholic Church to counteract the Counter-Reformation the Reformation, so that people would not leave the church. So you can imagine all these people that might be thinking about becoming a Protestant, but they would see these incredible images in churches and other sanctuaries and think, oh, you know, really, Catholicism is the place to be. So it's a bit of religious propaganda, in other words. Of course, what would a collection be complete without a lot of armor? I showed you that in last week and in New York. It always seems like there's a famous collector who wants to leave their armor to an art museum. The armor and these weapons used to be in a very central location in the Art Institute, but those were replaced by some Asian art, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So they do have a lot of American artists. This is a Winslow Homer, ladies playing croquet. They also have these Fishermen by Winslow Homer. These paintings are absolutely stunning. The sunlight just bounces off every surface. Look at the silver on the fish and the waves. Thomas Cole is well represented at the Art Institute of Chicago, as you saw in New York and in Washington, showing the beauty of nature in the new continent, North America, with the waterfalls, the beautiful forest, how important nature is, and see just in the middle, peeking over that dark mountain, you can just barely see the sun either coming up or going down. He's so smart, the way he bounces the light around the entire canvas to get your eyes. Look at the flickering white he puts in his trees, catching that last bit of sunlight. He was brilliant. And of course, we have Turner, a British romantic painter. Very large pieces, environmentally large in the way that you feel like when you're next to a Turner, you're in that landscape, or seascape in this manner. And of course, he was very anti-slavery, so oftentimes he would make social commentary with his ships at sea. And we also have a John Constable, and this, again, another British romantic artist, who both Turner and Constable were very big influences on the Impressionists with their choice of outside landscape paintings, and also with their use of white and light and how it reflects off the surfaces. The difference is Constable and Turner didn't have the influence of the snapshot quality of a camera. Remember, the camera hadn't been invented, and the Impressionists were also influenced by the camera and its like cropped, open compositions. And here's a quick sketch by Constable. I love it that these museums don't just look for the biggest, grandest example of each artist. This kind of shows you the multitude of talents they had and the timeline of what they did when. But look at the quick sketch marks that Constable used. Remember, he would go out in the forest or the meadows or whatever. He would do a quick little sketch and then he'd bring it back to the studio and augment the details and augment the size. So these were preliminary sketches for much larger pieces. They have a Delacroix, of course, another inspiration to the Impressionists, and very energetic. Of course, this is a French romantic painter dealing with literature. I mean, think Charles Dickens and what he was talking about, the play of factories and children in Great Britain in time. So much more emotional subject matter. And of course, the Far East was being explored at that time, so he couldn't wait to do harems and tigers and, you know, sheiks doing battle off horseback. So it brought a totally different subject matter to the art world. You have to remember that the definition of art keeps changing. It never has stayed the same. Of course, we have a huge collection of Monets. Thank goodness for some brilliant lady art collectors in Chicago, Illinois, because they brought this whole cache of Impressionist paintings. When no one else was interested, those ladies were buying it up. They had an intuition of what were going to be great masterpieces. And Adam and I are putting together a presentation, I think for later in June, on art collectors. And we're going to key in on California collectors as well. But I want to give you a little history about collecting and where it started, like think way back to the pharaohs in Egypt, all the way up to present day. So that'll be a lot of fun to put together. I hope you join me for that. So anyway, Monets. They have, of course, the lily ponds. The very wealthy in New York and in Chicago would spend their summers away from the city and in Paris. And of course, there were a lot of salon shows in Paris, and they would see this artwork and they'd pick it up. The French didn't want it. They thought it was unfinished and kind of juvenile, but the Americans, they liked it. And they brought it home. So these are all at the Art Institute of Chicago. And the Impressionists were also inspired by everyday life in Paris and new inventions, new fashion. So here you have Monet's train station and the steam and the power of these locomotives displayed in his artwork. And they have a brilliant collection of his haystacks. They would pick those up every chance they got. Bertha Palmer, Annie Swan, they would, you know, just send their collectors out, their agents out and say, get me another haystack. So they are on display in a gallery at the Art Institute. Of course, those were all done by Monet. See the lineup there? People are just in awe. I mean, a haystack, but people love these haystacks in winter and summer and spring and rain, shine, whatever. It's really a lot of fun. Here's some closer ups of his haystacks. He always did series. I mean, I think Rouen Cathedral, he did that too. What he was trying to do is capture the light and the differing light as the sunlight changed. He didn't care about subject matter. He always said, I wish I would have been born blind. So I'd wake up one day and I wouldn't have any preconceived ideas about what this subject matter is. I just want to paint the light and the color and the characteristics. Now, this is a great story. Helen Birch Bartlett and her husband, Bartlett, both artists, and they decided they're going to get married and they're going to collect art. They had a lot of money. They loved the Impressionists and they would travel to France and they saw the Seurat. Well, Georges Seurat didn't live very long and he only did a few paintings. I think he only painted maybe for 10 years or so, but he did a lot of great paintings, but there's not a whole lot of them. So the Bartletts looked at that piece. It's a monumental piece. You can see how big it is. And they decided they wanted it. So he said, they did a lot of negotiating back and forth. They bought that piece for $20,000 in the 20s. And the French said, oh, sure, go ahead, take it, it's yours. And they put it in the Art Institute of Chicago. And then the French said about, let's see, when was that? About 10 years later, the French came back and they said, hey, Helen Bartlett, hey, can we have that painting back? We'll be happy to give you $400,000 for it. And they said, no, no deal. It's part of the Art Institute's collection, and it will stay in the wing that is dedicated to Helen Birch Bartlett, because unfortunately she died at a very young age. And so there's no way that her husband would let that go. That is her crown, jewel in the crown. So this is a very interesting painting because historically, there wasn't a lot of free time in Paris because everyone who came to the big cities worked in factories. Well, then it became a legal holiday that you could not work on Sundays. It's a very Catholic nation, so you can't work on Sundays. And so what do you do with time off? I mean, this was relatively a new thing in their culture. And there were a lot of parks and monuments in France, thanks to Napoleon's nephew. And so people would go to the park. So what you're witnessing here is kind of pop culture for back then, because people had to find something to do on Sundays and they went out to these parks. And some people say, well, the people depicted in this painting look like Greek sculptures. You know, they're so stiff and static. So what Georges Seurat was trying to do is kind of put like a little history lesson in there, but he also wanted to show you the peacefulness. Now, every one of those textured areas you see there are dots. It's called pointillism. Maybe you've heard that term before, but this was a new theory going on. Color theory was just being written, and the physics of color and what it does to your eye. And so to get green, Seurat would put yellow and blue next to one another, these, you know, yellow dot, blue dot, and your eye then would mix it and make it look green. Well, several years ago, they thought, well, let's make a copy of it. So they commissioned an artist to stand right there at the Art Institute in front of this painting and replicate it dot for dot. Well, guess what? It took so long, I think they gave up on that mission. So Seurat really had a method for doing millions of dots very rapidly. And these were taken during the Blockbuster exhibition on Seurat. And these are some of his sketches. He did hundreds of sketches of the monkey that was going to go at the end of this woman's leash. He added the dogs later. He just kept working and working and working on all of this constantly, the diagonal of the shadows. It's really a brilliant composition. Look at all the repetition to get your eye moving around, all the activity. So it's really not a stiff and static painting at all. It moves. Okay, so Seurat. Renoir is highly represented as well. Bertha Palmer really enjoyed Renoir's work and she collected him as well as Monet's. And here we have again, an impressionist subject matter. It's outside, it's daylight, a lot of white, open composition. Here on the right, he's exhibiting the beautiful fashion of Paris at the time. Here's two young sisters on a balcony with their fancy hats. If you remember last week, we talked about the Phillips collection and how French young women would not be out of the house without a fancy hat. And then of course we have little circus performers. These are all hanging in the same room, a very large room at the Art Institute. Some people just have to sit down because it's so gorgeous. Right down the hall, actually behind the Seurat painting, is Van Gogh's My Bedroom, which is world famous. He did more than one of these, of course. He did these because his good friend Paul Gauguin was coming to visit him. So you notice the 2 chairs, one for each artist. He also composed all these paintings on the wall, wanted his friend Gauguin to feel very welcome. So there's a comfortable bed there. We've got the toiletries all set up. That visit did not go well. Anyway, what they've done, it's such a popular draw at the Art Institute of Chicago that there's a hotel in Chicago that has created this room. This is an actual room on the right that looks like My Room at Arles by Van Gogh, and you can stay there if you so choose. I just think it's kind of funny how they profit off of artwork. This Van Gogh also lives there. You can get really close to this painting and see each little brushstroke. Brushstrokes are so thick, it's almost like sculpture. This is a close-up, so you can see each little brushstroke. Obviously, he was obsessive compulsive, but did these beautiful obsessive compulsive brushstrokes. You can see how thick it is. Beautifully done, self-taught artist. Here's some more Van Goghs there. This is called The Drinkers on the right. I hope that little kid's drinking milk. And then the left, one of his portraits. You can see the flattened space, very much influenced by Japanese prints and the patterns behind her. Here's one of his landscapes. Everybody loves Van Gogh, gorgeous stuff. Of course, we have Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. You'll notice in this piece, since Lautrec was a very short man, that's him in the back, in the middle, in the upper part of the painting. You can see that he's walking there with his friend, a much taller person, I believe is his cousin, that they went around to all the bars and brothels together. But if you look at the perspective of it, here you have this railing in the bar, and you can see that we're almost on top of it. That's because he painted in the perspective he saw, which again, he was very short. So you're looking up into the face of this woman, this blue-faced woman. You're looking straight on at seated people. You're not looking down at them like you might be if you were a regular height. Just a little aside there. This is another Lautrec at the circus. He was on the verge of Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Expressionism. He put a lot of emotion into his work of the different side of Paris, so to speak. Paul Gauguin. This is when he went to Tahiti. When he didn't quite make it in Paris as an art person, he decided to take off. Here's some close-ups of his beautiful work. Like I mentioned, he and Van Gogh had a love-hate relationship, mostly hate, and Gauguin tried to distance himself from Van Gogh when Van Gogh was alive, but when he died and gained popularity, Gauguin said, "Oh, I taught Vincent everything he knows." So he was quite a shyster. More on that later. Okay, Caillebotte. He too never sold a work of art in his lifetime. He died rather young. Interesting thing about this piece, it's very large. He's also showing you a new invention, the umbrellas. Those were very new in Paris at the time. His father was an architect, and what Gustave is showing you is a building in the background that his father built, designed and built. So there's a lot of meaning to this. And so when no one else was buying Caillebotte, the American collectors did. And now it's a prized piece in their collection. As you can see the size of it, it's life size. You almost could walk into that painting. Mary Cassatt, of course. A long, illustrious career. Berthe Morisot, very famous female French impressionist, very successful in her lifetime. But like a lot of famous artists, once they die, their name kind of goes off into obscurity, but not in my heart. And we also have some John Singer Sargents. Oh, those Chicago ladies. Everybody wanted Johnny Singer Sargent to come and do their pieces. And this is a magnificent piece. It's at the end of one of the galleries, and you feel like you could just pluck that gown off of her body. He did such a fantastic job. And if you really zoom in and get close to some of these areas of her gown, you wouldn't even know what it was, except in context on a body, it looks like a gown. Very abstract, influenced by the Impressionists and everyone else. He's an American. And here's another one of his pieces. Now, a female person that painted in the same context as Singer Sargent was Elizabeth Sparhawk Jones. And I love this piece that they have at the Art Institute because these are women of that same time period, early 20th century, before they cropped their hair and their skirts. And they're all shoe shopping. Chicago's a great place to shop. The Magnificent Mile is full of every designer you can think of worldwide. They had a Edvard Munch exhibition, and they have several pieces of his work as well. Brilliant Norwegian artist. So they have a huge scope. They have everything from Greek and Roman antiquities to the latest contemporary work. Here's another staircase that's at the end. It's like every corner you turn, there's something brilliant to see at the Art Institute. Of course, they gave Georgia O'Keeffe a retrospect of her work because she spent a year at the Chicago Art Institute. Unfortunately, she fell ill and went to work for a graphic designer, quit painting altogether for a while, regained her health, and then went to New York. But here's some of her most famous pieces that live at the Art Institute. They have the buildings of New York, the cross over the New Mexican desert. She left a lot of pieces to the Art Institute of Chicago. She always felt an affinity with them. There's some other pieces that they have. Now, what's really cool about the Art Institute of Chicago is they do have and have had a glorious collection for a long time. And so as long as I'm talking about alums, not only was it Georgia O'Keeffe, but Walt Disney went there, Joan Mitchell, Grant Wood, Thomas Hart Benton, Richard Estes, Shel Silverstein, Orson Welles went to the Art Institute, Leroy Neiman, Ivan Albright, Jeff Koons. I mean, you must recognize most of those names. And so they had all this collection to be inspired by. So it's a great place to go, no doubt about it. It's always ranked number 1 or number 2 in the nation for art schools. They vie for the number 1 position. In fact, it's one of the few Art Institute, art museums and schools together. Anyway, they always vie for top position with Rhode Island School of Design. So it's always 1 or 2, Art Institute or RISD. So there's another piece of George's there. Another piece. They're really wealthy in Georgia O'Keeffe. And probably one of her most famous pieces. Remember when she started traveling at older age, she started to get inspired by her plane rides. She'd look out the window, she'd see the tops of clouds. And so she did this monumental piece. She always wanted to do a mural project. And so here it lives at the Art Institute of Chicago. And the great story about it is when she was painting it, she was a tall woman, but she wasn't that tall. And so she had to climb up on boxes and tables to get to the top to paint it, take some of those boxes away, do the middle. And then by the end of it, when she's painting the bottom, she was laying on her back, just like Michelangelo, right? And painted the last bit of it. But it's a beautiful focal point at this different stairway at the Art Institute. Of course, they're known for Grant Wood's American Gothic. Grant Wood, of course, was an alum, like I just mentioned. And people have speculated about this piece forever. Grant Wood was called an American regionalist. So at the time when in Europe, you're talking about surrealists and cubists, American artists said, no, I'm not doing that. There's still a lot of things I want to say about America that I don't need to abstract. But lots of great stories behind this one. And it's probably one of the most parodied paintings in the world. So here we have Kermit and Miss Piggy in front of their Gothic window. And that's why it's called American Gothic, because that pointed arch window in the background. And then, of course, on the left, we've got American Quarantine, you know, with our essentials, the gloves, the Lysol, and the toilet paper and the masks. I mean, this just goes on. If you Google this, you're going to find Mickey and Minnie and everybody else in there. And they've even done a huge sculpture that makes the rounds in the Midwest. And so the sculpture is dismantled and remantled in many outside settings of American Gothic. That is how famous it is. Wouldn't Grant Wood be proud? Another American icon, Edward Hopper. In fact, Hopper, O'Keeffe, and Jackson Pollock were the most internationally known American artists of the time in mid-century. You know, Europeans really didn't know any American artists, nor did they care to, except those three kept popping up. So here's Nighthawks by Edward Hopper. I'm showing you this for scale, but we can get closer here. And you can see it's a very serene, somber city street in New York, maybe after hours, totally after hours. And you can see how detached the people are. I mean, just put a cell phone in their hands and it would be very apropos for today. Everybody's ignoring, and there's really no way out, is there? It's kind of interesting dilemma, but it too has been parodied. You can see up here, we've got Starbucks and McDonald's beyond that, and you can see Star Trek as Nighthawks, and the Disney princesses, and then there's Marilyn Monroe and James Dean on the upper right. People just love to make fun of good art, but that's okay. Maybe it puts it in more people's minds. They want to see the real thing. Ivan Albright, another famous alum, he did these drippy, bulgy, bumpy human portraits. But toward the end of his life, he was also doing holograms, and I've seen some of his holograms. So he is an artist that moved along with technology. But here's poor Ida. She's looking at her aged self, trying to make herself more beautiful. So he's talking about the human condition a lot. And of course, he's famous for his portrait of Dorian Gray, which was in that movie, I think in 1932 or one of those years. And he was commissioned to do this portrait. And of course, Dorian Gray starts off as this handsome, wonderful man. This is in the movie. And he's really evil. And so this portrait's up in the attic. And as Dorian Gray does more and more nasty things throughout his life, the portrait starts to disintegrate. He becomes uglier and grosser, his true being. But Dorian Gray never changes in real life. He looks, you know, like a young, handsome man, but his portrait is revealing what he really is. It's a great book, it's a great movie. And if you watch the movie, the 30s version, you're gonna see this portrait. And this hangs at the Art Institute. So it's kind of fun to get close. Okay, so you go downstairs and you have a lot of American art. So here's some sculptures by some very famous Americans. And we also have the Wild West down there. Frederick Remington, a very famous American artist who did these cowboy sculptures and paintings, and he lived in New York and he painted in New York. I think he only made a trip or two out to the Wild West, but he could really capture the atmosphere and the colors and the feelings and the emotions. He was a great horse painter. I admire him so much on what he can do to horses. And so he would travel out west, he'd get inspired, he'd collect stuff, bring them back to his New York studio, and then complete these very large paintings. Here's another one. So a lot of action. You know, before there were even cowboy movies, Frederick Remington was setting the stage for them, so to speak. The lure of the West and the cowboys. You know, cowboy era only lasted about 10 years, and that was right after the Civil War. I guess Remington had a very famous grandfather in the Civil War, I believe it was. Here's some more of his pieces. Brilliant use of light. And then we happened upon this. This is a replica of Remington's New York studio, but we found it at the Cody Museum in Cody, Wyoming, before we went into Yellowstone. And so he had a lot of, you know, antlers and Indian blankets and rugs and buffalo hides. It's really kind of fun to see. So his studio looked like it should have been out west, but it was really in New York. Brilliant painter. Okay, I mentioned the Asian gallery before. They have many great prints of Hokusai, and this one is called The Great Wave. What you might not really notice is in the back, you see Mount Fuji, and it's in his series of block prints, the 36 views of Mount Fuji. So you get close-up of Mount Fuji, you see far-away shots of Mount Fuji, you see these men struggling in their longboats, trying to beat back the great wave, the tsunami maybe. I mean, it's just brilliant. When I would have my university students copy some masterpiece for either the composition or the color mixing, many of them would choose this. This was among their favorites. They just didn't know how difficult it was going to be, but they did a pretty good job. Here's some more Asian galleries. It's quite extensive. A lot of collectors in Chicago, as well as New York and San Francisco, collected a lot of beautiful Asian art. For its serenity, its beautiful craftsmanship. Many cultures are represented there at the Art Institute of Chicago. You could spend days there. All right, let's get to the contemporary wing. You have to remember that in the last 7 decades, the start of the 20th century and into the 21st, you have seen more diversity of styles. No two artists want to look alike. They don't want to be really grouped into any group. They want to be very unique. Think about the difference between Gauguin and Van Gogh. Think about the difference between Georges Braque and Picasso. Everybody wanted their own look, their own style. Sure, they might be lumped under Cubists, but it was only because of the time frame, really. So at the past 7 decades, just brilliant, diverse artistic styles. So here's Renzo's piano, his staircase in the new wing. And of course, they have their contemporary collection, one of the top contemporary collections in the world. They have Andy Warhol's Mao, and I'm showing you one of my group of students that I brought up there in front of Mao to give you a sense of scale. Andy Warhol wanted to do the most famous person in the world, so he was looking around, and he saw that Mao had been on the cover of Time 12 times. So he thought, Mao, yeah, I think I'll do Mao. So he did several Maos. We've seen Maos in Chicago, New York, Berlin. Maos everywhere. So Andy did a lot of Maos. But he also did icons like Marilyn Monroe. So here's one of his silk screens of Marilyn. He also, they've also collected Joan Mitchell. She's a graduate of the Art Institute of Chicago. She also was a Chicago girl. She was influenced by the lake. She was influenced by nature. She's quite a woman. She did some fabulous paintings. And so we could go on and on about Joan, but I'm so happy. When I first saw this, decades ago, I just loved it. And I was so thrilled when I got up to the name tag and it was a female, Joan Mitchell, which back when I was a kid, there weren't a whole lot of American art or female artists displayed in any museum. But they have Alma Thomas's, Eva Hess. These are recent collections. And Cindy Sherman, of course, with a lot of the other people that do a lot of collecting of Cindy Sherman's are Eli and Edie Broad in LA. But they've got Cindy Sherman's. They also go back to abstract expressionism. They've got Gorky's and Pollock's, just beautiful abstract expressionism work. And they have early Pollock's, which I really enjoyed. Here we have The Key by Pollock. That's in their collection. That's when he was doing a little bit of figurative stuff, maybe. And Picasso, Pablo Picasso, absolutely loved Chicago. They were the first museum, Art Institute was the first museum to give him a retrospect, early 20th century. So he sent a bunch of work over there. He became very famous, of course, and the Art Institute helped launch him in America. So he decided that he would give Chicago this monumental sculpture. And so this sits in Daley Plaza because the first Mayor Daley commissioned him to do this, or they worked in tandem to get this done. And the skyscrapers that you see in the background, since they were invented there, skyscrapers, they always insisted on having large democratic space outside of these tall skyscrapers. So as in New York, where all the buildings are like facing each other right across the street, Chicago said, we're not going to do that. We want large open spaces where people can congregate, and we're going to fill it with art. And so here we have the Picasso sculpture. Here are a couple quick sketches that Picasso did. He says, hey, I think I want to do this sculpture for you. What do you think? Well, what are you going to say to Picasso? No, it was fabricated in a mill in Indiana, a steel mill, and it cost $100,000. And there she is today. Kids play on it. People have picnics around it all the time. If you look at the other side of it, I should have gotten a back shot. It looks like a completely different image. Okay, so they've got lots of Picassos, hundreds of Picassos. And here's one that he did of a woman on the left in 1900, flat. And then in 1952, he did one of Paloma, his daughter. And you can see the style difference in 50 years. Picasso's style was always changing. So we have over 365 artworks by Picasso. This is a very large piece. He cut the man out of this picture and removed it so they're separated. Here's some more Cubists. Here's Sylvette on the right. He did many portraits of this young lady with the little ponytail, Sylvette. They're famous for the sleeping guitarist. Remember, he went through his blue period and his rose period. He went through Cubism. He went through Surrealism. He went through minimalism. He worked on play sets. He did prints. He did ceramics. He did sculpture. He did everything. But anyway, the sleeping guitarist is blue, period. And he did it in melancholy because he always said, color to the eyes is like music to the ears. And so blue was very melancholy. It's because he lost one of his friends. One of his friends died. And so he was in this kind of depression and just did blue paintings, monochromatic blue paintings. And then he got out of his depression and started picking on women. So he'd do these kind of two-faced women portraits, multiple perspectives. And here's one of his prints. And of course, his good friend Matisse couldn't be outdone. So he also gave a lot of paintings or sold a lot of paintings to Chicago collectors. So over 200 Matisses. This is a very large piece, a later Matisse. And then of course he did his South of France series of windows looking out to the sea. And this was our hotel room in the south of France in December. And I thought, wow, that looks just like a Matisse. So I had to show you our photograph next to one of his paintings. His paintings do not lie. It's absolutely gorgeous. They have Jean Miro, surrealist. And here's a Miro sculpture right across from the Picasso sculpture that I just showed you. So Dalí was very much into bringing art to Chicago. He wanted to up the status of the city. Here's Chagall's The White Crucifix. Chagall, of course, was Jewish, but he admired the Christianity, so he wanted to do this crucifix. Of course, Salvador Dali loved Chicago. He loved the United States, actually. So here we have a Dali, a rarely seen Dali, with a flaming giraffe in the background. And as we got very close to it, in the lower right-hand corner, you can kind of see a smudgy thing. And we looked very closely, and it looks like a hidden dog. You know, Dali had lots of dogs, and Picasso had dogs too. They loved Dachshunds, actually. This doesn't look like a Dachshund, but you can see the hidden dog in his painting. So did he do that on purpose, or over time did that dog just emerge? You take that dog out. You know, the life of a painting sometimes is more interesting in why the painting was done in the first place. Oh, here's Dali and his dog. That's a different, obviously that's not a Dachshund, but that's one of his dogs. He's much younger there. Dali. Here's another Dali sculpture done, kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing on the Venus de Milo with little furry puffs, those real rabbit fur puffs as you pull out those different draws of the Venus. Just absurd stuff, fun stuff. They have a motto. This is a very large piece. It's just brilliant, it glows. And of course they have a lot of Kandinskys. So they wanted to rival Solomon Guggenheim in New York and his collection of Kandinsky, so they bought up quite a few. Of course, Kandinsky said he could hear colors, and he liked to liken art to music. So this is improvisation number 30. So this is an early Kandinsky where you can see subject matter, and then later on the subject matter dissolves. They have René Magritte, another surrealist, Time Transfixed. They did a huge blockbuster show on him too. This is Not a Pipe. The Banquet. On the Threshold of Victory, this is a very large piece. So I wanted to show you just what a museum has to go through. If they don't want their artwork confiscated, they have to show you provenance. And that means they have to have like a bill of sale or how this artwork passed along to the Art Institute of Chicago to make sure that you didn't steal it or someone didn't steal it, like the Nazis stole so many billions worth of artwork in World War II. So here you can see where it was commissioned, where it was sold, and so they have all the bill of sales, and then eventually Lee Block donated it to the Art Institute of Chicago. Thank you, Lee. So they also had Chagall windows, huge stained glass windows. The Chagall wall is just a few blocks away, an outdoor sculpture by Chagall. And then the crowning glory lately is the Edlis-Neeson collection. Stefan Edlis was an immigrant before World War II. He came, he served in the army, he got out of the army, and then became a multi-millionaire because his firm produced plastics. And his major, he supplied Motorola with plastic. And he got so much money. He started collecting artwork back in the 60s. And he donated 44 pieces of contemporary art, pop art primarily, to the Art Institute of Chicago, with the stipulation, you could tell he was a very smart businessman. He just recently died, unfortunately. He said that if you show my artwork for the next 25 years without interruption, don't put them in storage. I will donate these works of art to you. So over $400 million worth of art went to the Art Institute of Chicago. They said, no problem, Stefan. We will clear out this whole gallery space and your artwork will go there. And it is monumental. He did this with Gail Neeson, his wife. So they have Gerhard Richter. They have Charles Ray, Jasper Johns, Jeff Koons' work. They have Murakami's work. They have this Rauschenberg. It's amazing what they have collected in a relatively short period of time. There's a Lichtenstein, there's a Damien Hirst. There you can see the Rauschenberg in the back there. They have Warhols. It's amazing, that whole gallery space. It's one blockbuster after another. And she is still alive and they maintain still more artwork in their home. So we wonder where that's gonna go. Now, in the lower level, so I'm going to end with this, is the Thorne Rooms collection. Narcissus Thorne was very interested in dollhouses when she was young. And as she married a very wealthy man, and her family had wealth too, she had these European craftsmen create these replicas of period rooms. And these are little, very small rooms, maybe, what are they, 16 by 10, 12, I don't know, but there's many of them. And the rugs are perfect, the gold frames are perfect, those are real candles, that's real ceramic, Chinese painted vases, the tiles are marble on the floor, miniatures, they're incredible. You just can't stop looking at them. And these are just bare essentials. Now there's 38 of them, and 10 of them, 38 are at the Art Institute, and 10 of them are in the Phoenix Art Museum. So I had to go to Phoenix and check out their art museum and their rooms, and Chicago has absolutely the best rooms. Now, why Phoenix got the bottom of the barrel, I don't know, but here's some more examples of them. So we have the early 20s modern here with a little Cubist painting on the wall. And then we have a very old library setting. I mean, it's worth the trip to Chicago just to see the Thorne Rooms. It's amazing. And this inspired me decades ago. I said, oh, a California living room. I like that. I gotta go check California out. So when our daughter decided to go to California for college, of course, we trotted on out here and fell in love with it. And that's why we moved here. Anyway, a good friend of mine has had great success in writing little novels for teenagers called 68 Rooms. It's really a marvelous collection of I think it's been translated into 80 languages or something. Her work has really caught fire. Marianne Malone, it's all about little children that got shrunk down to size. They get thrown into the thorn rooms, and the thorn rooms and the people that live in them come alive. And so they're embroiled in like the French Revolution and other crazy things. And it's a good way for young children to learn about history and ordinary people that lived through that history. So kudos to Marianne. But these are the ladies, I wanted to show you the ladies that made possible the collection at the Art Institute of Chicago. There's Bertha Palmer here on the left. She was considered the Queen of the United States. She traveled all over Europe and was treated like royalty. There's Annie Swan, who was a reclusive little old lady that lived in her hotel room full of Impressionist paintings. And there's Helen Birch and her husband Bartlett. And then this is Narcissa Thorne here on the far right in one of her thorn rooms. I wanted to give you a look at these people and who they really were. Okay, the latest acquisition when I went on the website is a Tiffany glass from 1917, totally designed by Agnes Northrop. She was the lead designer for Tiffany at that time. So this is coming to the Art Institute of Chicago. It'll be fun to see the installation. All right, until next time, we're gonna leave the Renzo piano, go across the street and dip our feet in those wonderful pools and head on down. Now there's a lot of other things to do in Chicago. I mean, it's endless. We could go to the National Museum of Mexican Art where we saw a retrospect of Frida Kahlo's work, go to the Contemporary Art Museum, the Lumna, which I've seen great Andy Warhol shows, and then of course the Heritage Museum of Asian Art. So all those museums, there's 100 museums in Chicago, but these are the highlights. Okay, let's grab a snack before our flight to Kansas City. So we're gonna stay at the Raphael. You have to remember that Kansas City had a World's Fair there, and so their downtown is almost like a Moroccan village. It is so cool. And so of course, if you're in Kansas City, Missouri, you have to have barbecue. So Q39 is highly ranked. And then we're gonna go to the Nelson Atkins. Now, why is it called the Nelson Atkins? It's because William Nelson was a major contributor. He donated money rather than his personal art collection. And so the curators, with all that money that he gave him, had to assemble a collection from scratch. Now, this was at the height of the Great Depression. So the worldwide art market was flooded with masterpieces, but there weren't very many buyers. So what did the Kansas City do? They built up this incredible collection. And Mary Atkins was a teacher in Kansas City, and she had one of the largest collections of art in the country. So she not only left artwork, but she left a big wad of money. I'd like to know what she taught. But she was also very good at economics, and through careful management, her donation doubled from 1911 to 1927. She was quite a frugal Midwesterner, that's for sure. So in those, 10, 20, 15 years, her donation of $300,000 went to $700,000. So this allowed the city to build this huge Beaux-Arts Temple to the Arts. Now this was built in 1933. You know, we're still working our way out of depression. They had a $2.5 million budget. That's about $54 million in today's dollars. So the interior looked like a Greek temple. The outside looks like a Greek temple. And when the architect was asked, you know, why are you using this kind of archaic style to do this? It should be a modern art museum. And he said, well, I'm going to choose this style because it's a proven style for over the centuries. You know, the Greeks used it, the Romans used it, the Renaissance used it, and I'm not going to mess around with $2.5 million. So I'm going to go with something tried and true. So it sits on a hill just like the Parthenon does. You walk up and it has over 500,000 visitors a year. It's really quite an incredible palace. Well, a few years ago, the Blocks donated money. When I'm talking about the Blocks, I'm talking about H&R Block, you know, your tax people. He donated $95 million to build this modern structure. So you see the neoclassical one on the left and the Block here on the right, and here's Mr. Block with his art collection. Now he and his wife also started collecting in the 60s, but what they had done is everything they donated to the museum, they had replicas made to stay in their home. And here's the descending Contemporary Art Museum, the block building, as it comes down the hill as the hill goes up toward the neoclassical structure. So, you know, everybody has to have a Caravaggio. So Kansas City, Missouri, you have St. John the Baptist in the Wilderness. I mean, this is an incredible piece. When I rounded the corner and I saw that piece, which I talk about at length to my university students, I almost fell over. Luckily, my husband was there to catch me. But this is such an exquisite piece, a pivotal piece in the Italian Baroque period. I could go on ad nauseum about this piece, but I'm moving along. So you can see the chiaroscuro, the light and dark, the emotional qualities. This is, and what I love about the Nelson Atkins is they show you where some of these ancient pieces originally were situated. So you can see the art in context. And so, of course, this was a chapel in Italy that someone commissioned to have Caravaggio do this one. Okay, so they've got Vermeers. And they've got Thomas Coles. They have Van Goghs. Here's a close-up of the Van Gogh, the heavy brush strokes again. These are so much fun to take. So you can see the little dots and dashes. They have Gauguins. They have Degas, ballerinas. They have Monet, street scenes. They have O'Keeffe's. They have Case Sages. Again, I was so thrilled when I went to this museum and I saw how many female artists they had. Case Sage was married to Yves Tanguay. Her career was much better than Yves Tanguay. She can see a service as well. They have Thomas Hart Benton's. I'm going to talk about that piece in a minute. And they have this Hopper. Now, Hopper usually does New York scenes, right? He doesn't do history paintings, but for some reason, he did this Civil War historical painting, and it ended up in Kansas City. But there's Thomas Hart Benton. He taught at the Kansas City Art Institute, and he actually lost his job because this painting was on display. That young girl, this is called Persephone, so it's about a Greek, myth where a lech is looking at a young, beautiful woman. Anyway, Persephone is a student of his, a very recognizable student of his. And here, Thomas Hart Benton, this old lech, is peeking around the tree at her naked body. There went his tenure. He also did Hollywood, a very large painting at the Kansas City Art Museum. So again, it's about culture, pop culture, showing you what was important at the time. Then we get to the contemporary wing. This is in the block building. We have this Rauschenberg and we have this Louise Nevelson on the right. The placard next to Louise Nevelson was very interesting for me to read. As I said, I loved that they have so many female artists. But the Nevelson said next to it, as the art critics were going through some exhibition in New York and they saw this piece and they got so excited about it. And then they read the name tag that it was done by a woman and they had to quell their enthusiasm. Oh my God, we're not going to tout a woman, no. So they have Helen Frankenthaler's. I love this one. This is Nam June Paik, Buddha Watching Buddha. Now remember, Paik did a lot with technology before artists were doing any technology. So there you have a camera on Buddha and Buddha's watching himself on television. It's hilarious. Paik does all these wonderful tongue-in-cheek pieces. Elanuzzi, he's still alive, obviously. We have Elizabeth Murray, Bridget Riley, they're still alive and doing some beautiful paintings. And you've seen this person, Shona Bar. I showed you her in the last 2 lectures. Always that little girl in that African fabric. Radcliffe Bailey, this is all about baseball. They also did Andy Warhol. They really like baseball in Kansas City, as you can tell. So if you have time, you can walk up the hill further to the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. So you can see they have a Louise Bourgeois spider on the right here, and they have another artist, a lot of site-specific art. Or you can visit the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures. They also have a collection of Narcissa Thorne's miniatures. And they also have these toys, like if you're my age, you would recognize all those toys through the ages. That's an incredible place to visit, along with Thomas Hart Benton's home and studio. Thomas went out one night after dinner from his home, went into his studio, died, and his family decided to keep his studio just as it was the night he died. So when you go into a studio, nothing has been touched. It's really a throwback. And you have the Folgers coffee can there, they used to mix paints and turpentine. It's a fabulous tour. You'll love it. Okay, so now we're going to take a quick 3-hour drive to Crystal Bridges. And Bentonville, Arkansas is where Sam Walton started his first Five and Dime. This is where Alice Walton grew up. Of course, it was a dearth of any kind of art at all. She was on a field trip once and collected a postcard of Picasso's musicians, 3 musicians. She was fascinated and read up on every art piece she could find in the library. She was very inspired and wanted to bring art to her hometown. So when you're at Crystal Bridges, it's always good to take a little side trip to this Walton's. It looks like a little Five and Dime, but you go in and it's a massive museum, a testament to Sam Walton and his Universal Corporation. It's really a lot of fun to see. That's his office there on the right, untouched. But my favorite part, of course, was the ice cream parlor right next door. Okay, we can also stay at the 21C Hotel, which is an art hotel. So you walk in and they have this rotating exhibition of artwork. They also have an excellent place to eat called the Hive. This is how it looks from the outside. Don't let it fool you though. The inside is monumental. And here we can check in at the desk. They have art everywhere. You know, green penguins and Che Guevara. You know, what else could you want? So then you make your way out to Crystal Bridges. So you have this unassuming little drive and you pull up to this and then there's this silver metal tree. And you just wonder, you know, what is this? So Alice had this built, and then she also had an art collection that she gave to it. She is ranked, along with her brothers, some of the world's richest people. She and her 2 surviving brothers are worth over 40 billion each. And this art museum has been ranked in the top 6 American art museum. Alice wanted it down in the woodlands. So there's running paths, you can walk to town, you can walk back. And it's really kind of a storybook setting. That is me before I go in. And this is what it looks like from the air. So Moshe Saldi did the design, the architect. He's an American and Israeli architect. The interesting thing about him is his daughter is an architect and she practices in San Diego. So there's a little connection there. But anyway, it's beautiful. It encompasses the wooded area. So there he is with Alice and they're discussing art and architecture, I'm sure. She too has a Maman by Louise Bourgeois, the large spider called Mommy or Mom, because spiders are so protective of their young. But then you walk in and you have this red, white, and blue tattered material called We the People. You can see it on the wall there. And so she has early American art. She has Native American art. She has Native American portraits. It's really a testament to not only contemporary art, but kind of a historical overview of art and these beautiful buildings that you walk from one to the other and you can look out at nature constantly. She also is into architectural preservation. So she had this Frank Lloyd Wright dismantled brick by brick from New Jersey and shipped to Bentonville, Arkansas, and reconstructed brick by brick. And this sits on the grounds now. It was in danger of being flooded too many times in New Jersey. So they up and took it to Bentonville. So some of the furnishings that he designed, the light fixtures he designed, everything is in alignment. The cinder block wall lines line up with the cushions on the couch, which line up with the lines on the floor, which line up with the patio lines. Everything lines up, even the door lines. If you notice, the doors line up with the patterns on the floor. Amazing architect. So that's kind of fun to walk through. Kind of minimal, but beautiful. And of their art collection. So you've got Georgia O'Keeffe, you've got Alfred Stieglitz's photograph here on the right. You've got the gypsum weed painting that she paid over $44 million for. Georgia had a real love-hate relationship with gypsum weed because it's actually a poisonous plant, but she made it look so happy and welcoming. Then there was a special exhibition that these were artists that were inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe. That was happening while we were there. They also had Georgia O'Keeffe quotes printed all over the walls. And these are some of the women that were inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe. These are examples of their work. They also have Hans Hofmann, Sun on the Wall painting. Hans Hofmann, as you know, was an instructor from Germany that came over during Hitler's reign and started teaching in New York. So he's responsible a lot for abstract expressionism, color field painters. He was very open and welcoming to men and women painters in New York. Jackson Pollock never really studied with him, but they knew about each other. So she has a Pollock, number 30, Birds of Paradise. She has a Joan Mitchell, as you saw at the Art Institute. Mark Rothko, she paid that much for a Mark Rothko, very famous American color field painter, although he defied any description. He didn't like that title at all. We have a Diebenkorn, very well known for his Ocean Park series, California painter. He was very much inspired by Matisse. Can you see it? Marisol Escobar, again, lots of women painters. These are women on the beach, and I thought it was appropriate to show everyone here on the West Coast. So these are all hand carved by Marisol. She was considered a pop artist. She was a really good friend of Andy Warhol. She just died a few years ago, unfortunately. She had a lot of influence while she was working. This is all hand carved. Look at how she had that little toe sticking up there. Very clever. And those naked buns. I think I saw some of those on the beach today. Anyway, Wayne Thiebaud, Sublime Woman. I'm going to do a workshop and a lecture on Wayne. When you see this piece, she's almost life size. She's just, laid out there. The dress and flesh and hair are so thick with paint, it almost is like frosting on a cake. So Wayne is very clever. He does food too, and you just want to dive into it. It's so luscious. And this was a great montage. This woman traveled across America, and she stopped and painted different sites. So LA's in there, Florida's in there, Kansas is in there. It was really quite delicious to take this travel along through the United States. These are small canvases, maybe 8 by 10s. She does a lot of salon wall hanging. This is what the Europeans used to do. It's called salon wall hanging. Just fabulous. You can't take your eyes off of how they curated and hung the paintings together. Everything from Andy Warhol next to Winslow Homer, next to Andrew Wyeth. Fabulous. And these are just different visions. So you can see outside. There's a Jeff Koons heart hanging in the cafeteria. I love this one. I had to take lots of pictures of this one. So the name on this painting is called Husband of Eagle of Delight. So I love that he's the husband of a Native American princess. Not Chief so-and-so, he's the husband of. But they do a lot of contemporary artwork too. This is done by Valerie, as you can see, Haggerty, and she's copying Bernstadt and his beautiful painting of American wilderness, but what's happening to our wilderness now? It's disintegrating, and so pieces of that artwork are falling on the floor. She's not afraid of controversy either. This is by Titus Kapoor. It's called The Cost of Removal. It was inspired by this Andrew Jackson portrait, but as you can see, he's covered up. Was he really a hero? Was he really an American hero? She shows us Edmonia Lewis. She was a famous sculptor in Europe. She came from the United States, but she went to Europe to gain fame. And when she came back from Europe, she became famous in the United States too, but she had to go away from her land for anyone to notice her. So the Europeans noticed her first. Edmonia Lewis. Recent acquisition, Kihine Wiley. He did Barack Obama's portrait. You might see the resemblance there with the floral background. He does beautiful African Americans. And then I found this. I thought this was so interesting. This is by Al Souza Field. He took hundreds, if not thousands, of puzzle pieces and created this image that looks like an abstract painting, but it's actually lots of puzzle pieces. I can't wait to do a workshop with lots of puzzle pieces like this. Of course, they have a Joan Brown and Chuck Close. They have Evan Penny. This is so interesting. He does these very lifelike, huge heads of himself as he thinks he's going to look when he gets older. And you just can't take your eyes off of these sculptures. They are so realistic. And of course, they have a Julie Menthu She had a great exhibition at the LACMA just recently. She was born in Ethiopia, but she's an American citizen. She does these densely layered abstract paintings that are huge. They're monumental. They're massive. She has 2 in the lobby of the SF MoMA, San Francisco Museum of Art. She also has some pieces in the San Diego Museum of Art. So please do visit when you can and look up Julie Menthru. And Amy Sherrill is represented, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Faith Ringgold. Actually, this was a commissioned piece. I think Oprah Winfrey might have commissioned that piece with the poetry on either side for Maya Angelou. So that's a beautiful piece that Alice acquired. So I'm going to say thank you to Alice Walton. Even if you're not a Walmart fan, just think if you ever do go in there, you are helping to support that art museum. And here's some shots from around Bentonville, Arkansas. It's a really lovely country. So coming soon, like I mentioned, The Art of Collecting. And we have J.P. Getty here. We have Catherine the Great, who amassed millions of paintings. We have Gertrude Whitney Vanderbilt. We have the Broads beneath her. We have wonderful Peggy Guggenheim in the middle on the bottom with her cute little doggies, which are buried with her in Venice. And we have Virginia Dewan here in the lower left hand. Many of these are California collectors, but obviously many are not. So I hope to see you at that one too. Please ask any questions or have any comments for me. I'd be more than thrilled to answer anything you have. Thank you for your attention.